So metabolism, chapter 25, this is a summary. We have some definitions to know. And the first thing is, what's metabolism itself? It's not here because we did it before. Metabolism is obviously all biochemical reactions happening in our body at certain time. Right now, what's happening in your body, all these reactions, whatever it is, we call it metabolism, generally speaking. And then we will get into the details. So these reactions that I just mentioned can be either anabolism or catabolism. The ana versus kata means, ana means building, kata means breakdown. So anabolic or anabolism means you put things together in order to make something bigger. You're building, like you put bricks together to make a house. This is called anabolism. I put glucose together and I end up having glycogen. I call that anabolism. I build a whole big glycogen from tiny glucose units. We call that anabolism. Catabolism is just the opposite. I get this molecule of glycogen, I break it down into pieces of glucose, and I call that catabolism. I get protein, I break it down into amino acids, and I call that catabolism. House, break it down into bricks, catabolism. Okay? The other thing is when you build, you put energy in. So it takes energy to build. The opposite is when you break down. When you break down something, you take energy out of it. Okay, so it's the catabolism release energy. It's an energy producing reaction, meaning you get this glucose to the cells break it down, and what we get? We get energy. Do you guys remember the aerobic and anaerobic that we studied before? Remember when we get the glucose inside the cells and break it down and get a lot of ATPs out of it? Because it's catabolism. This glucose, I break it down into pieces, carbon dioxide and water. When you break down something, you gain, you release energy out of it. Aerobic versus anaerobic. Aerobic, obviously, air means oxygen. So aerobic is when you actually use oxygen to break down something. And again, we talked about that aerobic is something that needs oxygen. And obviously, this happened in the mitochondria. You get something into the cells, you can start working on it. This is not aerobic yet. When you get the glucose into the cells, I break it down. Not aerobic yet, because it's not in the mitochondria. It's in the cytoplasm. So glucose, I take it into the cells, I break it into 2-pyruvic acid, release some energy. That's anaerobic. I didn't use oxygen yet. Where do we have to use oxygen? Mitochondria. Do you still remember that? Okay, so the first part, when I get not necessarily glucose. Glucose is the most commonly used example. It can be anything else. I can get glucose, fatty acid, amino acid, any one of these basic nutrients. When I take it into the cells, if I'm using oxygen in the mitochondria, I call it aerobic. If I'm not using oxygen, obviously not in the mitochondria, we call that anaerobic reaction. In both cases, I'm going to get ATP anyway. Why? Because aerobic and anaerobic reaction in this case, I'm doing catabolism, right? Are we following? I get the glucose into the cells, I break it down. Catabolism, obviously. So releasing ATP, I'm gaining or releasing energy in the form of ATP. When that happens in the cytoplasm, I break it down and I gain a little bit of ATP. What if I have oxygen? I'm going to get the rest, push it into the mitochondria, using the oxygen to complete the breakdown process and gaining a lot more of ATPs. And usually you end up producing carbon dioxide and water beside the energy. And when you use oxygen, we call it oxidation. Oxidation. So oxidation can be using oxygen, but there are other forms that I'm going to talk about. And why are we using oxygen? Why do we have oxygen? This is something that you need to know. Why the mitochondria doesn't work without oxygen? I need oxygen to work. Why? Because if I have the oxygen, any hydrogen that's produced will go into the oxygen and I make water. So this is what we call it. The oxygen in this case, we call it the receiving of the hydrogen molecule. It receives it. So we have to have water, I mean oxygen, that's used for oxidation, and this will end up gaining the hydrogen and we make water out of it. What's the end product of anaerobic reaction? It depends on what are we talking about. If we are using like glucose, it's pyruvic acid. What's the end product of aerobic in the mitochondria? Carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide and water. All of this is AP1, but still I understand that we forgot it. Refreshing your information again. Okay? So aerobic using air, which means oxygen, and this happen in the mitochondria, and we end up that the oxygen end up receiving hydrogen, which is water, plus carbon dioxide. So that's why you have to have oxygen. How can you make carbon dioxide? How can you make water without the oxygen? Oxidation versus reduction. I told you oxidation is using oxygen, right? But the general term of oxidation is when you lose one or more electron. So in the case of oxygen, oxygen is going to gain these electrons. But generally speaking, if I get a molecule and I take electrons out of it, it's oxidized now. This is called oxidation. Are we following? Oxidation. You you take off electrons out of it. Reduction is the opposite. When you gain one or more electron, I'm reducing this substance. I'm reducing it. What do you mean reducing it? Adding electrons to it. I'm oxidizing this substance. What does it mean? I'm taking off out of it. The next three terms are ketonemia, ketoacidosis, and ketonuria. You notice that the three start with ketone, right? Keto, keto. Three, that means that's start with keto. What's emia? Emia, blood. Emia means blood. What's urea? Urine, obviously. And ketoacidosis. What's ketoacidosis? Acidosis, pH goes down because of the keto acids that we have there. Let me explain this process. Normally, when glucose is absorbed and go to the blood, isn't that what we talked about in the digestive system? You absorb glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids and goes into the blood, correct? Okay, so this glucose, when it goes to the blood, it will ultimately go to the cells, right? The cells this is like the food for the cells. They will eat it. They break it down. If they have oxygen, they will do aerobic, right? This is a normal process. In order for the cells to utilize glucose, you have to have insulin. Why do you have to have insulin? Insulin literally push glucose into the cells. You don't have insulin, you cannot get the glucose. That's it. Like, did you guys were able to enter here without me coming? You're waiting, right? When I come, I'm using this and open the door and you guys can come in. I am insulin. So insulin open the doors for glucose to go in. This is normal, okay? How about this? Two conditions. One of them, what if you don't have enough insulin or the cells are not responding to insulin? What do you call this? Diabetes, right? We know diabetes. You don't have enough insulin, or this is not absolutely correct. It's not that you don't have insulin. This is one of the conditions. The other one is you do, but it's not working. The cells are not responding. In those two cases, what are the cells doing now? Getting glucose? No glucose, right? You cannot get glucose. Glucose cannot enter the cells before insulin open the door for it. Are we following? What if you don't have enough insulin? The door is not opened. The cells are not going to get glucose. The cells are going to starve. No, they will find an alternative. Is that alternative good? No, but they don't want to die, right? What do you want the cells to do? You don't have enough insulin, or you're not responding to insulin. The door is not opening. There is no glucose. What should I do now? How to get my energy? I will use alternative, whatever I have. What's the alternative? Amino acid and fatty acids are in these, the other two, right? The building units, remember this? Glucose or monosaccharide in general, amino acid and fatty acid, right? These are the basics. So what should we use? Glucose. You cannot use glucose. You're not going to die. The cells are going to turn on the fatty acid and amino acid and use it instead. What's the problem with that? Why people having diabetes, they have an issue? What's wrong with that? Use amino acid and fatty acid. So what? No. When you do that, you will end up producing a final product that's called keto acid or ketone. And this is what we're talking about right now. This ketone is bad. What's the end product when you oxidize glucose? Carbon dioxide and water. Is there anything bad here? Water is normal part of your body, right? There's nothing wrong about that. How about the carbon dioxide? You breathe it out. There is nothing wrong with that, right? But there is something wrong if you utilize amino acid or fatty acid, which is production of ketones or keto acid. Because this keto acid is not something that you're going to breathe out. It's something that accumulates in your body. And since it is acid, the keto is keto acid. Since it's acid, what's the condition? Ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis. The ketone or keto acid, keto what? Keto acid. It's an acid. So you end up with acidosis. What's the normal pH of the blood? 7.35 to 7.45. What if you go under 7.35? Acidic or acidosis, right? So when you add keto acid, because you're not utilizing glucose, that will end up in you're going into acidosis. Your pH goes down. How much? It depends on the keto acids, and it's not important. Just acidosis and that's it. Okay? You add acidosis, you end up having ketoacidosis. pH goes down. Why? Ketone bodies, which is an acid, accumulate, causing ketoacidosis. Is there anything else that can also do similar situation to diabetes? Yes, if you're starving. If when you eat in the morning, let's say you're taking your breakfast, usually you get some carbohydrate somehow, right? You always get some carbohydrate, whatever the source is. Almost all the food have carbohydrate. So you don't have an issue. You will end up getting your glucose and everything is okay. What if you're staying outside the whole day long and you're not eating? That's okay. I'm going to use my glycogen that's stored. You remember in the digestive system, one of the things that the digestive system do, being the manager of the digestive system, that it store extra food, right? They put together glucose to make what? Glycogen, right? What's the storage form of glucose in your liver? Glycogen. Glycogen. Don't forget this. Glycogen. What's glycogen? A big molecule of glucose. Glucose, 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 add it, you end up getting this big molecule of glycogen. So how do we store the extra glucose? Glycogen. Where? Liver and muscles. So what if I didn't eat for some time? That's okay. You're covered. You can get some glycogen from the liver, break it down into glucose and use it, right? What if I'm out of it? I'm staying outside for 5, 6, 7 hours. You take from the muscles. I'm staying more. We call that starving now, right? 12 hours without anything. You're not eating, you finished what you have in your liver, you finished what you have in your muscles, you're out of it. So what should I do now? Of course, I'm not going to die. The cells are not going to die. They will do the same scenario using something else, which is fatty acid and amino acid. And if that's the case, I end up producing ketone bodies, which is keto acid. I end up getting ketoacidosis. Acidosis, of course, anything abnormal is bad, isn't it? Everything should be within the normal limit. pH 7.35, 7.45. Should it go up? No, that's bad. Should it go down? No. Now it's going down. So acidosis have bad effects. Ketonemia, the name give it away, ketonemia. Ketone bodies in the blood. That's it. Ketone in the blood. How about ketonuria? The name give it away. What's ketonuria? Ketone in the urine. Easy. That's what it is. Ketonemia, ketonuria, and ketoacidosis. This is what we need to know. Why does it go to the urine? What do you want to do? Like you're adding up and it's accumulating in your blood. What should you do? You have to get rid of it somehow, right? Part of it is to get rid of it in the urine. We call that ketonuria, right? Okay, next is essential and non-essential amino acid, essential and non-essential fatty acids. And this is actually very easy. When you eat, they always tell you eat balanced diet. Do you remember this? That contain everything. Glucose, carbohydrates, fat, protein, everything. You should get everything. If you don't get it, the body can make certain things, not everything. Amino acids. Can our body make amino acids? Not all of it. You can make part of it. We call that non-essential amino acid. So where did you get essential from? Essential in the food. It's essential in the food. So when I say non-essential amino acids, it means you can make it. Since you can make it, it's not essential. It's okay. I mean, if you get from outside, it's extra. That's fine. But I can do it, right? So is it essential in this case? No, it is not essential because I can make it. Can you make every single amino acid? No, you cannot. Some amino acids you cannot make it, and we call that essential amino acids. Exactly the same for the fatty acids. Can we make some fatty acids? Yes. We can make a lot of fatty acids. All of them? Not all of them. Some of them you cannot make. You have to have it in the food, in a diet. So we call it essential fatty acid. So it is essential amino acid, essential fatty acid, non-essential amino acid, non-essential fatty acid. Is that clear? Just remember, essential means you have to have it in a food. You have to have it in your diet. Why? I can't make it. I cannot produce it. So this is essential and non-essential amino acid and fatty acid. This is basically what it is. Nitrogen balance. The one thing of the organic molecules that contain nitrogen, most important is proteins, amino acids. They contain nitrogen. Does the carbohydrates contain nitrogen? No. Fat? No. It is proteins, amino acids. All right? So if you get proteins, you're eating proteins, and you break it down, you will end up producing some nitrogen. This nitrogen, you will get rid of it somehow. Are we following? You eat the proteins, you break part of it down, you produce nitrogen. So you're adding nitrogen to the body. That's not normal. Anything goes up, it's not normal. Anything that goes down is not normal. Are we following? Clear? So what I'm doing now, I'm loading my body with nitrogen. Is that okay? Not okay. You have to get rid of it. How much? Whatever you're adding, you have to get rid of it, right? You're adding 100 units, you get rid of 100 units. That's it. If that's the case, you do have the nitrogen balance. If what you're gaining is more than what you're losing, that's positive balance. If what you're losing is more than what you're gaining, we call that the negative balance. What's normal? The normal is whatever you gain is equal to whatever you lose. Very simple. Is that clear? Just like anything else. You drink water and you get rid of water. I drink a liter, I get rid of a liter. That's it. It's balanced, right? What if I'm gaining a liter of water and losing 2 liters? You get dehydration, right? That's negative balance. What if I'm drinking a lot of water and I'm not losing it? Positive. You get overhydrated, right? It's the same concept for anything. You gain and lose. What you gain equal to what you lose. That's balanced. If the nitrogen that we're gaining is more, what do we call it? Positive nitrogen balance. What if you are gaining is less than what you're losing? Negative balance. Okay? Negative balance. If you forgot it, it's like this. I make $1,000 a month and I spend $1,000 a month, that's fine, right? I make $1,000 and I spend 500, I have a balance, right? That's positive. I gain. If I make $1,000 and I spend 2,000 in credit cards, I will end up being in debt, right? Which is negative. I'm being on the negative side. That's exactly what it is. Same concept. Basal metabolic rate is the next concept. And basal metabolic rate is the basic rate of metabolism that barely cover you at rest. If you're not doing anything, nothing, you're laying down, how much energy do I need? This is called the basal metabolic rate. Okay? What do you mean? I mean keeping you alive. That's it. Like keeping your internal environment. How much energy that I need to keep my body at 37? It's not kept by itself? Of course not. We know that, right? If it's getting cold, you have to warm it up. If it is getting hot, you have to cool it down. Isn't that normal? In order to do that, you need some energy. That's part of it. Internal temperature, repairing cells. If cells are injured, don't you need to repair it? Our cells are injured all the time, 24/7. You're relaxing, you're working, you're laying down, it doesn't matter. It will happen anyway. And you have to repair it. You need some energy to do that, right? Your heart has to be working all the time. Does it matter if you're relaxing or not? It has to work, pumping the blood. So the basics. Imagine you're laying down, zero activity. Are you still needing some energy? Of course, as long as you are alive, you still need energy. The minimum of which is basal metabolic rate. Okay, so this is the amount of calories that you consume at rest in order to keep the basics of life: the body heat, the heart working, pumping blood, cells repairing cells, breathing, the basics. We call that basal metabolic rate. Are we actually at the basal metabolic rate? When you think you will be on the basal metabolic rate, we're always doing something, right? You're always moving. Even if you're sitting down, you're moving around. But the minimum is the basal metabolic rate. Sensible and insensible perspiration. Perspiration, as a word, it means losing water. Losing water. This is called perspiration. Sensible or non-sensible, these are the two different things. Okay? Sensible is when you lose the water through glands, secretions. Like what? Like sweat glands, right? If sweat glands, you're using a gland to get rid of the body fluids. Insensible is something that's not from the glands. It comes from something like evaporation. That's not a gland. Respiration. What's respiration? Do you lose fluid when you just respirate? Yes. Get a mirror and put it in front of your mouth and breathe. You'll see vapor on the mirror. What does it mean? That there is vapor in the air that you're breathing, right? This is a form of losing fluids, but it's insensible. Evaporation. What's evaporation? Fluid, and I'm not talking about the glands now. We know the sweat glands under your skin, sweat glands. This is a gland producing fluid, and it goes out. That's sensible. So remember it, sensible sweat, SS, sensible sweat. So glands producing fluid, pushing it out, that's sensible. Is that the only way? No. Some fluid under your skin, it squeeze itself in between the cells until it gets evaporated out in the air. So evaporation, respiration, evaporation, respiration, this is called insensible perspiration. Did we get the two? Sensible sweat, insensible not sweat. But sweat, I mean glands. Glands, your sweat glands are getting rid of it or losing fluids, which is in this case, it's the sweat. Otherwise, if it is happening in breathing, respiration, or if it's happening by evaporation, we call that non-sensible. Next term is pyrexia. And pyrexia or fever, it means elevated body temperature. Elevated body temperature. Body temperature should be 37, which is 98.6. If it goes up, we call that pyrexia. Fever is if you exceed 100 degree or 37.8. There is not a single word in this summary that you don't need to know. This is like the summary of the summary. I didn't ask you guys to do the whole all the slides and everything. This is what you have to know. These are the basics, the SLOs, the most important part, the core of the chapter. There is nothing that you don't want to know. So should I remember 100 degree of 30, it's 37.8? Yes, you do. Anything here is something that you need to know. What's a normal? 37. 37, of course, it's an average, plus or minus half. So if my temperature is 37.3, is that okay? Yes, it's okay. Within the normal range. If it goes up to half or under to half, that's okay. Which is translated to 97.7 to 99.5. There are different ways to measure your body temperature. The normal way that we all know is surface temperature. You get that thermometer and you put it like on your skin or something. That's the surface, which is less. It's less than the core inside. So in order to measure the core, it has to go somewhere inside. Like sometimes, if they wanted to know, they can put like this thermometer in the rectum or something, in the esophagus, in the blood. The core inside is a little bit higher. So if I measure, if my body temperature is normal now, and I put a thermometer on my skin, 37, that's perfect. Okay. At this second, is it 37 inside? No, it is not. It's like 37.5, something like this. This is called the core body temperature, what we have inside. If you go under 35, we call it hypothermia. If you go above 37.8, it's fever. Or 37.8, 37.5, it's okay. But this is up to 38.3 or 99.5 to 100.1. It's just before 101. Hyperpyrexia. Hyperpyrexia, I mean pyrexia or fever is the same as hyperthermia. Okay? These are the same things. Fever, pyrexia, hyperthermia, same thing. No difference. It's just different name for the same thing. But if you exceeded 40, this is another definition. This is called hyperpyrexia, and this is dangerous. So we have certain numbers that we need to follow. Okay, if it goes up a little bit, it's kind of a fever. If it exceeds, we call it 37.5. If you exceed that, you call it fever or pyrexia or hyperthermia. Very high, hyperpyrexia, above 40. And this is, again, it's dangerous, especially in kids. Did we hear about febrile convulsions? Did you hear about this kid is getting like the body temperature is getting really high and he start to shiver? If you ever see that before, uh, this is if you exceed that limit, 40, which is 104. So if anybody have kids, this is extremely dangerous. You cannot exceed the 40 or the 104. Under that, it's still fever. It doesn't mean it's okay, but not as dangerous. Once you get into the 104, the magic number 40 or 104, now it's dangerous on the brain, especially of the kids. Okay, to the extent of if that happened and you're waiting for the like the ambulance or 911 or something, even if you put water on you on the child, that's okay. If you put him under the shower, that's okay. It cannot exceed this limit. Very dangerous. It can actually hurt the brain to that extent. So this is our magic number or our upper limits, 40 or 104. Under that, we can manage it. We can use something, can wait a little bit. That's okay. But if you get to this point, that is very dangerous. Last definition is calorie. Calorie, by definition, is the amount of energy that's needed for 1 gram of water to increase 1 degree centigrade. If you get this 1 gram and it is 40, how much energy do I need to make it 41? This amount is called calorie. Okay? So you need to remember this definition. Energy required for 1 gram of water to go up 1 degree centigrade. Um, what's the difference between using carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids as source of energy? Why do we gain weight when we eat lipids? Why, if you want to lose weight, they tell you cut on the lipids, right? Because carbohydrates and proteins, if you eat a gram of one of those, you will end up getting about 4, like 4.1, 4.3. It's very similar, but it's about 4. But look at the lipids, more than double. Okay, so if you eat 10 grams of fat, it's more than double, which means you get energy more than 20 grams of proteins and carbohydrates. That's the amount of energy that we get per gram. Um, you don't have to be very specific. 4.18 in this one. It's 4. It's a little bit above 4, but this is above 9. Next part are these reactions. For these reactions, you need to define them. And if, I'm not saying you have to, if you see ATP's numbers, you have to know it. If you don't see it, that's okay. So what's the first term is glycogenesis and glycogenolysis. Both of them start with what? Gly glycogen. Glycogen, right? Read it. Here is glycogen until here. And this is glycogen, isn't it? So here, aces versus lysis. This is the difference. Genesis is generation. So this is when you generate glycogen. What do you mean generate glycogen? We talked about this in the digestive system. What do you do with the extra monosaccharides or glucose in the liver? Stored in the form of glycogen. Is that anabolic or catabolic? You're putting which one bigger, glucose or glycogen? Glycogen is bigger. So if I get extra glucose and I put it together to make glycogen, is that anabolic or catabolic? Anabolic, right? And what are we doing now? Glucose, 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 glucose. You end up getting glycogen. This is generation of glycogen, isn't it? Glycogenesis, glycogenesis, glycogen genesis, generating glycogen. And what's lysis? Breakdown. So what do you do with the glycogen? You break it down into Glucose, right? So these are the first two things. And both of those, they occur in the cytoplasm. And you do need to know what's the definition, where does it happen in the cells? And if I give you ATPs, you need to know the ATPs. Okay? I didn't ask you for this, so that's okay. But the point I'm trying to make here is you need to understand where the name came from. Okay? This instead of just memorizing things as it is, understand it. Glycogen genesis, generating glycogen. Make sense? You put glucose together to make glycogen. That's it. How about glycogenolysis? Glycogen lysis. Break down glycogen into what? Into glucose. When should I do this and when should I do that? What do you think? When should I use glycogenesis? When I have extra glucose or less glucose? When do I generate glycogen from glucose? Less glucose and you take more of it and put it in a form of glycogen. If you when do you store? If you have extra or less? Extra. You're storing. You put the glucose together and store it in the form of glycogen. So if that's the case, what does it mean? You have extra. Like I'm just eating. I had my breakfast an hour ago. What should I do? Which one? Glycogenesis, right? When are you going to use the other one? If you're not eating, right? Couple of hours after you finish and you use the glucose that was available. What's my next step? Break down glycogen, get the glucose and use it. Make sense? So if you have extra, which is after eating, you store the extra, glycogenesis, right? If I don't have enough, I didn't eat for 3, 4, 5 hours, I start to get that storage, which is glycogen. I break it down, get the glucose, use it. Glycogenolysis. Next is gluconeogenesis. Let's cut it into pieces. Gluco is glucose or carbohydrates in general. Neo, what does it sound like? Neo. New. New, right? Genesis is generation. So what does it mean? Gluconeogenesis. Generating new glucose. What does it mean? Does it mean that I'm eating glucose? Of course not. We wouldn't call it new, right? So you basically, it's making glucose from non-carbohydrate source. And that's we call it new glucose. New glucose. Was it carbohydrate? It wouldn't be new if it was carbohydrate. It was something else. Are we following? Can I do that in the body? Of course. We're not getting into the details. It's a lot. It depends on the situation. We do it if we are um, not eating enough. So if you want to compare it to that, it would be with the glycogenolysis. Okay, because at this time you do need glucose. So this is another source of glucose. So if you want to combine it together, it would be glycogenolysis because glycogenolysis will give you what? Glucose. And gluconeogenesis give you glucose. What's the difference? Other form of it's not carbohydrate. Isn't glycogen carbohydrate also? Glycogen. Glycogen is carbohydrate. So if I get glycogen, break it down into glucose. That's not new. That's okay. That's normal. Glycogen is actually glucose. So there's nothing new here. But if I get fatty acid or amino acid and convert it completely into glucose, this is something new, right? So that's what we call it gluconeogenesis. And we do that if we don't have glucose, we can convert part of the extra amount of amino acids or fat or cholesterol, we can convert it. Of course, we don't need to know the details, but this is basically what we need to know. Next part, next reactions will go together. These reactions, we talked about it before, but I will refresh your information. Glucose in the blood, go to the cells, right? Insulin, push it into the cells. Now it's inside. Where inside? Cytoplasm first, right? When you enter the cells, do you find the mitochondria? or you see the cytoplasm first? Cytoplasm. When you enter the cytoplasm, like you go to the house, you go to the entrance, or right, or the hallway, or whatever. You don't go to the bedroom, right? So the mitochondria is like the bedroom inside. So I go to the cytoplasm first. Glucose now in the cytoplasm. What are we going to do? I'm going to break it down into two pieces. Is that enough? Not enough. But this is the first step. I get that glucose, cut it into two pieces. What are these pieces? Pyruvic acids. Glucose is 6 molecules of carbon. I break it down into 3 and 3. Each 3 is pyruvic acid. Clear? We call that glycolysis. Where does that happen? Cytoplasm. And the end product is pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid. We get out of this 2 ATPs. And you do have to remember, this is what the beginning said. If you see ATPs, you have to remember these ATPs. Okay? How do, yes. No, the first step of everything is in the cytoplasm because this is the entrance. Anaerobic. Glycolysis is anaerobic. Why? Because it's in the cytoplasm. Where is the aerobic? Mitochondria. Can you do anything in the mitochondria without oxygen? No. No, you cannot. Mitochondria means oxygen. You have to have oxygen. Mitochondria doesn't work without oxygen. Is that clear enough? Mitochondria doesn't work without oxygen. So what's the first step? The glycolysis. What does it mean? Glycolysis. Break down glucose into what? Two pieces, 3 carbon. What do you call it? Pyruvic acid, and this is glycolysis. Is that okay so far? How many ATPs do we get? 2. How did you get the 2? Do you just produce 2? Actually, no. You use 2 and you produce 4. So what's the end product? How many did you gain? 2, right? But you made 4. Yes, I used 2 of them. So what you end up releasing 2 ATPs. Next, do we throw away the pyruvic acid? Of course not, right? You barely break it down. You still have a lot of energy remaining in the pyruvic acid. But this is only if you have oxygen. If you have oxygen, your mitochondria is okay. You can give me the pyruvic acid and I'll get you more energy out of it. Only if you have oxygen. So what is it? What's happening in the mitochondria? Aerobic or anaerobic? Aerobic, right? You're using oxygen. So what's the mitochondria? What's going to happen in the mitochondria? Tricarboxylic acid cycle or citric acid cycle. It's the same thing. Tricarboxylic acid, it's two names. One is old and one is new, but we're using both of them. Tricarboxylic acid or citric acid cycle, both of them happen in the both of them are the same thing. And it happened in the mitochondria. And this is where we are going to break down. It's a lot of steps that we're not responsible for, that we're not doing biochemistry, but the bottom line is you get that pyruvic acid, run it into a cycle, step after step after step, and all what I care about is you start with pyruvic acid, a lot of reactions, you end up producing carbon dioxide and water, and you get and hydrogen is produced as well. You produce also hydrogen. You produce carbon dioxide and hydrogen. Not water. I mean carbon dioxide and hydrogen, not water yet. The water is the next step. Hydrogen and carbon dioxide. This is what we get out of the tricarboxylic acid cycle. Yes, it has different names. Last step, still in the mitochondria, is called oxidative phosphorylation or electron transport chain. Electron transport chain. Electron transport chain is following the citric acid cycle. Why do you need the electron transport chain? What is the end product of the tricarboxylic acid cycle that I just told you? Carbon and hydrogen. Carbon dioxide and what? And hydrogen. Carbon dioxide, that's okay. I will get rid of it. But the hydrogen, it goes to the next step. Hydrogen go to the next step, which is electron transport chain. Okay. In the electron transport chain or electron transport system, it's the same thing. This electron transport chain without going into the details. Electron transport chain. Electron, you mean the hydrogen containing one electron. Transport, you are going to go like across the membrane, in, out, in, out, in, out, somehow without the details. You just get that electron and put it into this chain, in and out. And you end up getting the rest of your energy, and this will be 28. 28. Oxidative phosphorylation basically means you oxidize something and you use it to phosphorylate something else. What's phosphorylate? Phosphorylate is to add phosphate. Are we following? Example, or what does it mean? Do you remember the ADP and ATP or not? Adenosine tri and adenosine di. Look at this. Adenosine di phosphate, right? If I add phosphate to that, I'm adding phosphate to it. We call it phosphorylating. You're adding phosphate. So which one is the one that contains the energy? ATP or ADP? ATP. So what do I have first? ADP. I get energy and put it and add phosphate. You end up producing what? ATP. What is this process? What did you do? I added phosphate, phosphorylation. So you oxidize first in order to get the energy and then use it to make ATP. We call that oxidative phosphorylation. The ATPs that you get out of this, you have two from glycolysis, four from an intermediate step that I didn't talk much about, which is there is something called NADH that's produced in the glycolysis. So glycolysis give us how many? Two. That's it? Yes, but it give you something called NADH. This is a vitamin. It comes from a vitamin. So glycolysis, what did I get? Two ATPs, okay? Plus NADH. Is NADH energy? No. That's why we still say two. NADH, later on, it will end up giving you another four. So 2, 4. A tricarboxylic acid cycle is 2, and then 28 from electron transport chain. So I can ask you about any one of those. How many ATPs did you get out of each one of these steps? And I also can ask you, what's the total? What's the total? What do you think? 36. Add this. 28 and 2, 30, 34, 36. So the total that we get, is that aerobic or anaerobic, the 36? What do you guys think? Is it aerobic? What do you think? 36. Aerobic or anaerobic? 36. Aerobic. How about the anaerobic? Which one? Yes, which step? First step, which is glycolysis. So glycolysis is anaerobic, and we get 2. So if I ask you, how many do you get? I don't have to say glycolysis. If I ask you, how many ATPs do you get of anaerobic? 2. How many ATPs? The whole thing, starting from glucose until the end, 36. And I can ask you how much do you get from the electron transport chain and so on. So I can be like ask you in different ways. So I think I'm being clear here. What's the end product of all of this? We already talked about carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide. How about the hydrogen that you're using? Aren't you using oxygen in the mitochondria? And you're having hydrogen. What is this together? Water. So what are the final products? Carbon dioxide and water plus energy. Clear? Okay. Next is lipogenesis versus lipolysis. Exactly the same as glycogenesis and glycogenolysis. Do you remember? Which one is formation and which one is breakdown? Lipogenesis is formation of lipids. Lipolysis is breakdown. Lipogenesis, you make lipid from non-lipid. Lipogenesis, what do you mean? I mean, if I'm eating a little bit of food in the morning, I'm going to utilize it and store the rest as glycogen. What if I'm eating too much? I can't store all of this. Are we following? If I barely eat something, I'm going to utilize all of it. If I'm eating a little bit more, which is everybody of course does, I'm going to store the rest as glycogen. What if I'm getting a lot? You cannot convert all of this to glycogen. You convert it to fat. And that's why you gain weight, right? Because anything extra, I have no choice. The body, listen to this, the body will never get rid of anything. The body will not like throw it away. The more that you eat, the body will have to store it somehow. Okay? If you get barely what you need, that's okay. If you eat a little bit, that's okay. A little bit more, they will store it. And that's not bad. Glycogen, you need it anyway. But if you eat more than that, beyond what you need, the body have no other options but to convert it into lipids and store it under your skin. And this is when you gain weight. Okay? So we call this process lipogenesis, making lipid from non-lipid. Whatever the food that you're eating extra will become lipids. Lipolysis is the opposite. When you break down lipids, and what is the most common form of lipids in the body? Triglycerides. Triglyceride. What's a triglyceride? Glycerol and three fatty acids. Triglyceride. Tri means three. Glycerol. Ride is fatty acid. So what's the triglyceride? One glycerol and three fatty acid. One glycerol, three fatty acid. Triglyceride. What's the triglyceride? The most common form of fat. So when you tell me I'm eating something contain fats, blindly I will tell you triglycerides plus something else. Yes, maybe cholesterol, whatever. But when you eat, most likely it's triglycerides. So triglycerides, it's glycerol and three fats, right? If I break it down, what do I get? Glycerol, fatty acid, fatty acid, fatty acid. Clear? Is that clear? When you do this process, we call it beta oxidation. This process of breaking down triglycerides into three fatty acids and one glycerol, we call that beta oxidation. So beta oxidation is oxidizing, degrading, breaking down triglycerides. Urea cycle. What's the urea cycle? Urea cycle is simply, here is what's happening normally. Let's make it as simple as possible. When you eat, when you have proteins, protein is a source of nitrogen. Did we agree on that? Protein or amino acids, this is a source of nitrogen. If you eat more, that will be positive nitrogen balance, isn't it? When you eat a lot of nitrogen, you can you're overloading your body. So that will be nitrogen, positive nitrogen balance. Is that something good? Anything that's abnormal is not good. So what's that source of that nitrogen? In the form of what? In the form of something called ammonia. And ammonia is toxic. Are we following? What do we produce out of the amino acids and proteins? Ammonia. What's wrong with ammonia? It's toxic. So what do we do? Do we keep something toxic in our body? No. You convert it to something that's not toxic, which is urea. Clear? So you do have to change ammonia, which is toxic and non-soluble, into urea, which is non-toxic and soluble. And then This will go to the urine and everything is fine. This is how we get rid of it. And where does that happen? It happens in the liver. What if somebody's having a liver failure? You know what's going to happen? The beside jaundice. Yeah, jaundice is one thing. Beside that, what's going to accumulate? What did I just mention right now? Ammonia is going to accumulate. And what's wrong with ammonia? If it go to the, it's toxic, and if it go to the brain, it will cause issues in the brain. It's called encephalopathy, but that's okay. We don't have to know much more than that. But this is a urea cycle. Nitrogen in the form of ammonia, toxic, change it into urea cycle, throw it in the urine. That's it. Decarboxylation. What's D? Without, and carboxyl, carbon dioxide. Decarboxylation, when you remove carbon dioxide from something. Okay, and this happened in a mitochondria. Deamination, what's D? Without, amination is amino group. When you take off the amino group from an amino acid, we call that deamination. If you understand the word, if you break it down and understand it, it's impossible to forget it. Deamination. You take off amino group from the amino acid. Decarboxylation, removing carbon dioxide. And this happened in a mitochondria. Transamination, what's trans? Exchange. Trans is exchange. This is just translation, by the way. Just translation to English. Trans is exchange. Here is one amino acid, and here is one amino acid. Are we following? Amino acid and amino acid. This amino acid contain amino group. This amino acid contain amino group. If you exchange the amino groups, or you move one from one to the other with exchange, we call that transamination. It's two reactions happening at the same time. Exchanging the amino acids from one group, from one amino, the amino group from one amino acid to another. But the other one is called alpha keto acids. You take it from this one to this one, moving from one to one. The other one is called alpha keto acid, that's without the amino group. Electron transport system. This is what we talked about. It's a cytochrome system, the system that takes the hydrogen and keep on moving it across the membrane until you end up getting 28 ATPs. Beta oxidation is what I just talked about. Beta oxidation is when you break down the fatty acids, which is catabolism of fatty acid, and you end up producing something called acetyl-CoA, and you get 2 ATPs. So what's beta oxidation? Beta oxidation of what? Of fatty acid. You oxidize the fatty acid. You break down the fatty acid. Do you remember when we break down the glucose into pyruvic acid? Here you break down the amino acids into acetyl-CoA, and if that's the case, you end up getting 2 molecules of ATP. This happens in a mitochondria. And the 2 carbons, each time you remove, like this is in the beginning only. And then from the rest, every time you remove 2 carbons, fragments from the fatty acid, the cells get 17 ATP, 12 from acetyl-CoA that I just talked about, and 5 from another source that's called NADH. So at the end, from the fatty acid, you get 144 ATP if this fatty acid is 18 carbon molecule. Lipids and amino acid catabolism. Catabolism is breakdown. If you catabolize, what's catabolism? Breakdown. If you break down amino acids or fatty acids, you are going to produce acetyl-CoA. And this acetyl-CoA will become keto bodies. Do you remember this? Do you remember the ketone? If you don't have glucose, you utilize other sources. I talked about this, like diabetes, right? So what do you use? Amino acid and fatty acids. What's the issue? Ketones, right? Do you get ketones right away? No. You get acetyl-CoA, and this will become ketone. And there are 3 forms of ketone bodies that you need to know. 3 names. acetoacetate, acetone, and beta hydroxy butyrate. The problem is this is going to go to the circulation. It's going to cause ketoacidosis and ketonemia and ketonuria. However, you can get part of it and break it down and send it into the tricarboxylic acid cycle. But this is not the main thing. The main thing is accumulating. Effect of these hormones on metabolism. This is more of putting together what we already learned. It just put it together in the form of metabolism. We talked about parathyroid hormone and insulin and glucagon and all of this. So let's put it together. Parathyroid hormone increase calcium in the blood, right? What's the opposite? Hmm? Calcitonin. The opposite is calcitonin. It decreases calcium in the blood. Insulin, the role of insulin is decrease glucose in the blood. We all know that, right? If you're diabetic, you have high glucose. Make sense? So what's insulin doing? Decrease the glucose in the blood. How? Number one, it take the glucose, push it into the cells. We talked about this, right? Is that the only way to get rid of glucose? Insulin get rid of glucose? Is that the only way? No, this is the main way, the most important way. Are we following? Insulin, does it increase or decrease glucose? Decrease the glucose. How? Number one, push it into the cells. That's number one. Is that the only thing? No, it is not the only thing. You can, or insulin can, push the extra glucose to form glycogen. Isn't that getting rid of glucose? When you get that glucose, put it together and store it. Isn't it taking it off the blood? Reducing it, right? So you can do glycogenesis. So we call that hypoglycemic effect. What's hypo? Low, glucose, emic, blood. So this is hypoglycemic effect, means reducing glucose in the blood. Glycogen and epinephrine, both of those, I talked about it in the endocrine system. I'm sure that most of us forgot it. But does that increase or decrease glucose? Anybody remember? Glucagon, increase. Epinephrine, increase or decrease? Epinephrine, increase. Why? Because epinephrine is what? Sympathetic or parasympathetic? Don't you need more glucose for more energy? Yes. So is it hyperglycemic? Those two. Hyperglycemic effect or hypo? Hyperglycemic effect. Both of them. How can you do hyperglycemia? The opposite of insulin, right? You just do the opposite of insulin. The insulin take the glucose and put it together in form of glycogen. How about you? No, I would do the opposite, right? What's your job? Increase glucose. I get the glycogen, break it down into glucose. What do you call this process? Glycogen lysis, glycogenolysis, right? Glycogen lysis. You break down. Is that the only thing? Is there another way to make glucose from non-glucose? Gluconeogenesis. Yes, gluconeogenesis. So what do you do? Whatever the tools that I have, I want my job is as um, part of my job as epinephrine or glucagon, both of them. What do you want to do, epinephrine and glucagon? I want to increase glucose in the blood. How? Whatever the source. Glycogen, I'll break it down into glucose. Here is some glucose. Convert non-glucose into glucose. Gluconeogenesis. Here is another source. End product is hyperglycemic effect. Both of them. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, ATCH. This was part of the endocrine system, and it's also called glucocorticoid. And this have hyperglycemic effect. Do you guys remember when I told you epinephrine, glucagon, and glucocorticoid? The three increase glucose. Do you remember this? If you don't remember, you need to know it. It's called gluco, because it increased glucose. So glucocorticoid also increase glucose, and we call it hyperglycemic effect. Thyroxine, the last one. Thyroxine is coming from which gland? Thyroid. This increase overall metabolism. And I mentioned that several times before. Increase overall metabolism. You get more energy? Yes. You get more glucose? Yes. Uh, does your body heat up, warm up, or cool down? Does it increase or decrease body temperature? Increase. Next are these lipoproteins. What lipoprotein mean? Lipid and protein, right? Why are you doing this? Because you cannot just leave the lipids in the blood like this. It will deposit on the wall. We add, cover it with proteins somehow. Chylomicron is the first one, and I talked about chylomicron Thursday. Do you guys remember? You absorb glucose, send it to the blood, that's okay. You absorb amino acids, send it to the blood, that's okay. Fatty acid, no, it's not okay. You have to put it in the form of lipoprotein called chylomicron. Do you remember that? We talked about this. So this is the first lipoprotein. The other ones are um, very low density, intermediate density, and high density. What does it all mean? Here's the bottom line. Listen, if I get some oil and put it on the water, does it float or sink? Float. Translation, low density. Clear? If I get a piece of meat, put it into the water, is it floating or sinking? High density. Is that clear? So, translation. What do you think? Very low density lipoprotein, which is more, protein or lipid? It's very low density. Which one is low density? Fat or protein? Which one float? Fat. When something floats, it's low density. If it sink, it's high density. High density, it sink. Clear? So very low density, obviously it means most of it is fat. Most of it is fat. Okay? So this is a very low density. And in this case, there is an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase that remove triglycerides from these very low density because it's too much. It's very low density. It's huge amount of fat and a little bit of protein. How about intermediate density? Less fat than very low density, isn't it? Less fat. All of them are protein and fat, but intermediate density is you removed some more triglycerides. And this is intermediate density. If you remove more lipids from that, it will become low density lipoprotein. And low density lipoprotein is the so-called bad cholesterol. Did we hear about good cholesterol and bad cholesterol? Low density lipoprotein. What is more, fat or protein? Low density. Fat. Is that good or bad? Bad. So that's the bad one. How about the high density? What does it mean? Which is more, lipid or protein for high density? Protein and a little bit of fat, right? That's good, isn't it? So yes. So if you ever did this lipid panel, did anybody did the lipid panel before? If you do it and you're trying to read it, this is what you should know. Part of it, the lipoproteins. If you have good amount of HDL and less amount of LDL, you're good. The opposite is bad, right? So why, this is a little bit of an explanation. Why do we have those two? Like this one is lipid and protein, and this one is also lipid and protein. This one is more lipids. That's why it's low density. And this is high density, right? Why do we do this? The low density, it take the fat from the liver and send it to the circulation. So it has to be loaded with a lot of fat, transported into the circulation to get rid of it. The problem is when it go to the circulation, if it is too much, it's going to deposit on the walls and and have other bad effects. High density is the opposite. High density is more what? Proteins. So because it has more proteins, it can carry more lipids, send it to the liver, and the liver will get rid of it. Isn't that something good? That's why it's called high density lipoprotein and low density lipoprotein. What exactly happened during starvation? I talked about this. If you're eating, you're getting your carbohydrates, you're getting your glucose, you're using it, everything is good. After a couple of hours, you're not eating, you turn to what? What's your source? Glycogen in the liver and muscles. Use it, use it, use it, use it until you finish it. You're fasting. Okay? So now you don't have glycogen anymore. What should I do? And what do you call this process when you utilize glycogen? Glycogenolysis, yes, glycogenolysis. So, okay, I'm not eating. I will get the glycogen from the liver and muscle. I'm going to use it, break down, break down, break down. It's ended. I finish it. I'm starving for 7, 8 hours. Am I going to actually starve to death? No. I'm going to turn into other things, and this is what I talked about, which is you're using amino acid and fatty acid, acetyl-CoA, ketone bodies, ketoacidosis, ketonemia, ketonuria. I talked about this before. Balanced diet is a diet that's balanced, meaning it contains all what you need. Essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, carbohydrates and fats and proteins, enough amount of all of these. Water, obviously, ions, right? Everything that you need, you have to gain it. Balanced diet. Vitamins and minerals. Vitamins, these are organic nutrients. It's essential as, here is the most important word, coenzyme. Vitamins are what's co? With. Co means with. Coenzyme means with the enzyme, helping the enzyme. So this is the most important thing. It helps the enzyme in the reactions. Okay? And these vitamins can be fat soluble or water soluble. And I talked about that Thursday, and I told you to remember those. Do you remember A, D, E, K, and B, C? So these are the vitamins. Minerals, on the other hand, are inorganic. Inorganic. They come from dissociation of electrolytes, and electrolytes like sodium and chloride together, they determine the osmotic concentration of the body. This is one. Some of them help in physiological processes, something like magnesium and calcium and others. And some of them help enzymatic reaction. The vitamins, fat soluble A, D, E, K, you do need to know the function of each one of those. A, visual pigment. And that's why if you don't have vitamin A, you get night blindness. D, remember vitamin D, calcitriol, calcium absorption. E, membranes, stabilization of the membranes. K, blood coagulation. You make proteins that are clotting factors out of it. You don't have it, you don't coagulate the way you should. The water soluble vitamins, on the other hand, it's B and C, basically, but a little bit of more details. B is B1, also called thiamine. It's important for decarboxylation, and if you don't have it, you have a condition called beriberi. We don't need to know the details, but this is what we have to know. B2 is called riboflavin. It's part of something called FMN and FAD. This is basically something that helps the reactions in the body. It carry hydrogen in the body. Niacin is part of NAD. Do you remember NADH? I talked about it. Take the H and make energy out of it. So this is NAD. Riboflavin is for FAD and NAD. These are helpers of the reaction, of the different reactions. Vitamin B5 is called pantothenic acid pantothenic acid, I mean. And pantothenic is part of acetyl-CoA that's needed for the brain function. B6 is called pyridoxine. It's important for amino acids and fatty acid and lipids metabolism. If you don't have it, it can cause uh, CNS retardation. 7 is called biotin, and this is important for decarboxylation. If you don't have it, you get different issues, muscle pain, dermatitis, and so on. 9 is folic acid, and this is important for amino acid and nucleic acid metabolism. You don't have it, you cannot do this metabolism, and the problem is it can cause mental retardation. B6 is the one that's important for red blood cells. If you don't have it, you get pernicious anemia. C is ascorbic acid, and this is it delivers hydrogen and it works as antioxidant. Last thing here is pH. Normal is 7.35 to 7.45. Goes up, it is alkaline. If it goes down, it is acidic. You have two systems. What's a normal pH? This is the last thing that I'm going to talk about. Just one more minute. What's a normal pH? 7.35, 7.45, right? If it goes under, it's acidosis. If it go above, it's alkalosis. What are the systems that's controlling this? Respiration. When you breathe out, you get rid of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide in the blood is kicked out. It was doing carbonic acid. So when you breathe more, you have alkalosis. We call that respiratory alkalosis. pH is going up because of respiratory cause. You're breathing more. What if you breathe less? You don't get rid of carbon dioxide. It add up with the water, carbonic acid, acidosis. This is respiratory. Anything else is called metabolic. Metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis. It's another reason or another cause that's causing this um, acidosis or alkalosis. It's called metabolic. So alkalosis is high pH, acidosis is low pH. If it is due to respiration, we call it respiratory. Alkalosis or acidosis. If it is not, for any other reason, failure of any of the system, like the bicarb system, like you're eating a lot of food that produce hydrogen, and so on. This is another way, which is called the metabolic. So the bottom line is it because of the respiration or not? Okay, and that's it.